Welcome to the Neophytes of Narratology, the internet's most pretentious and pseudo-intellectual pursuit since, perhaps, Nietzsche's thus podcast Zarathustra, or Camus' renowned Vlog of Sisyphus. While lesser men aspire to stand on the shoulders of mere giants, we at the Lost Signals will accept nothing less than titans. So join us as we delve into the fundamentals of narrative nuance and critique the critics who proclaim to know the universal qualities of effective storytelling. Hello, and welcome to our finale of SZ by Roland Barthes. I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, here with Stephen Hermosi.
Hello.
And Scott Thurlow.
Hail.
So we are finishing off our close reading, which has taken forever.
Much like close readings do.
Of SE, which we are going to do 65 through 93 today. And hopefully say our final piece on Bart forever.
The final part of Bart.
So
Parting with Bart.
Parting with Bart, indeed. So let's dive right in to 65, the scene. And what's discussing here is the use of codes in dialogue and how a lot of conflict in dialogue is a result of competing codes.
Right.
In a sense, it has nothing to do with truth. The truth values of what someone is saying, it can, but it's not necessarily the main thing that the codes actually provide the conflict. So any further...
No, I mean, again, it's sort of like a straightforward point, but it makes sense and sort of, it's nice that he pointed it out here.
Well, my disagreement with you in here is that it's more, not necessarily a straightforward point, but him applying his methodology with codes
I say it's
to
both,
what
then.
is a kind of
Sure.
more straightforward discussion.
All right.
Yeah.
Well said.
I mean, I don't have much more to say about this section.
So on to 66, which is rudely one, everything must hold together.
I think it's the readerly I. Sorry to correct you.
I believe it's one.
No, yeah, it's I in the sense of Roman numeral.
Yes.
So
is there an
yeah, there's readily
too?
too.
Okay.
Yes. Or readily I, if you will.
Go on.
Very clever. Very clever, Bart.
This actually is I think, addressing one of the most common critiques of this day and age, which is the idea that a narrative must proportionally make sense and have a natural quality to it. Like, for an example, in Game of Thrones, there was a discussion about like Littlefinger's jetpack, with how does this character, like, all of a sudden cross the continents, where it takes other characters episodes upon episodes to make the same distance. And we have kind of an eternal clock within us, I would say, or a sense of size. And that it is the role of the author or the director or the creator to cater to this.
To make sure,
so that everything remains proportional as it should. That our sense of time is consistent. Our sense of place is consistent. And yeah, that's should be something that is intuitive. But it's something that I see a critic pointed out as a flaw in many works today.
Right. I think that it's one of the hardest things to do while writing something, but when it's done well, people that are actually, reviewing or are really looking at a piece of art like hard, whether it be a story or a movie or whatever, they appreciate that and they see it but not only that, but it comes through for people who aren't paying attention to it. They just don't necessarily always notice that.
That's the big problem with this concept, is that if done well, you're
not supposed to notice it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. There's I think we mentioned when we did the review for Mad Max how good of a job the director did
in terms of that, yes,
at keeping spatial awareness, and that feeds into this as well.
No, there's one line from this section that I like because it goes to what you said. So the text itself has to, Barthes writes, prepare its defense against some enemy that may force it to acknowledge the scandal of some illogicality, some disturbance of, in quotes, common sense. So it's like, like you said, like pointing out things that may seem inconsistent, but the text itself is aware of it.
I'm going to call this the rule of nitpick.
Yes.
But it's actually
Sounds
something
about
that
right.
is really a major issue. But unless there's another thought, move on to my favorite title.
The best title of the sections he's laid out.
And the biggest letdown.
Yes. 67. How an orgy is created, which unfortunately has nothing to do with the instructions.
It's not an
of how
instructional
yes.
treatise.
So, my notes on here, I don't think this really had much importance outside of the story.
Yeah.
I think it was more detailing, in a sense, that idea of place and cultural codes
Yeah,
and
it's mostly
expectations
that.
within things. But I said there's some great out-of-context lines throughout this entire thing. So I don't know if anyone has any to pull out.
Right, well, all right, I'll just throw one out. Finally, the orgy dies down, ends. We are in a physics of the orgy. Whatever that may mean. But it is funny.
Yeah, I like the... This is an announcement interior to the story, analogous to the physical indices that enable us to decipher in advance a tempest, an earthquake. We're in a natural history of the orgy.
Oh, of course, yes. Your favorite, his earthquake metaphor returns again.
That's
yes.
right.
Further, a certain moment of this orgy, given under its generic name, abandonment, can no longer be analyzed like the orgy itself, but illustrated by certain typical items of behavior, sleeping, spilling wine. We are in the inductive logic of the orgy, based on exempla. Now, I think that...
And just real quick, you definitely always want to be in the inductive logic of an orgy, like, clearly.
Absolutely. I don't think he's
You
using
don't want to be in the
orgy
deductive
here.
logic of an orgy.
Sure.
I don't think he's using orgy as like the term where
It's not
jestingly...
like literal, yeah.
It's more of like a decadent party.
Yes,
you know,
a gathering
atmosphere.
of unscrupulous individuals engaging in scrupulous things.
So, 68 is The Braid, which is going back to the previous discussion we had in the last episode, which is dealing with the weaving of codes.
Yeah.
And in a sense, the weaving also of causal nexi. In
The plural of nexus, yes.
Yes. So, again, it's more of a technical piece here, dealing with, in a sense, kind of building upon further his concept of how the codes are interwoven, to be redundant there.
Sure, no, I mean, I like it, and he says here, the grouping of codes as they enter into the work, into the movement of the reading, constitute a braid, text, a fabric, the same thing. Each thread, each code is a voice. These braided or braiding voices form the writing, which, yeah, it's sort of like I don't want to say redundant, but it kind of is. But again, like a thing to keep in mind that's how he's viewing this entire endeavor, and it's how he analyzes how, the various codes come together.
So if I may get Bartesian here.
All right, go ahead.
We know the symbolism of the braid. Freud, considering the origin of weaving, saw it as the labor of a woman braiding her pubic hairs to form the absent penis. The text, in short, is a fetish, and to reduce it to the unity of meaning by deceptively univocal reading is to cut the braid, to sketch the castrating gesture.
Yes, and the specter of castration looms again in this section. So, if you say so, Roland.
Sure, Bart. Yeah.
So, I'm going to interrupt the scheduled close reading of SC for a philosophical musing of my own.
All right.
Because it is here that actually, oddly enough, that idea of the castration there kind of really drove home, I feel, to myself, the concept that Bart was going for.
Mm.
So yes, it seems out of place throughout that he's constantly bringing up castration. And even after this, I will say that he delved far too much into this. But I think that this is inherently what's wrong with the close reading as a way of analysis. That we view it on a flat linear surface from point A to point B. I'm going to reference another work, Flatland, Romance of Ultimate Dimensions, which is dealing with, we are, in a sense, two-dimensional creatures analyzing narrative as a one-dimensional line of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, all points on a line.
Linearly.
And yeah, we can go and read it and see, like, this is all the events that happen in chapter 1, chapter 2. As we're going through here, this is what Bart is saying in section 1 here, this is what he's saying in 63. But I think more along it's not a flat line. It is a woven braid. And that we see, when we view it as a flat line of a very linear analysis, it seems disjointed because you're viewing part of this thread, moving on to a second thread, moving on to a third thread, and back to the first thread. It seems like there's disjunction here.
By focusing very, very closely, you lose like the broad picture.
It's in a way like viewing a map. Now you can understand, like, look, oh, here's the mountain here, here's the forest here, but I'm going point A to point B. But you're not getting the experience of the heights of the mountains and the depths of the valleys and the darkness of the forest. I think that's what Barthes is trying to demonstrate here. He, in a sense, to go back to Flatland, he's arguing for a three-dimensional view of narrative when we're so used to our like linear close reading. This is how I was taught in school how to do analysis of works, to focus on a single thread or to focus on the flattened narrative structure and analyze from there. And I think he is at least challenging my worldview. And I have not bought into his view yet.
But you see where he's coming from.
I started to get a glimpse. I had a kind of a flash of light in the darkness of the cave that I'm analyzing in, where he's coming from.
You're in Barthes' cave.
So that's the end of my musing. If any of you have any comments on that.
No, I do. I mean, I like that because it's, again, you don't think about that. You just sort of are like routinely doing it that way. But if you take a step back and sort of like maybe take some pointers from him, if not buying into all his theories and ways of viewing it, if you were. But I like your map analogy. That was really good because it sort of shows you that there are other ways to view this, and maybe you'll get more out of it, and maybe you're losing something by only focusing on one strand, if you will, and not the entire picture or whatever whatever emerges from the many individual threads.
I mean, I may have misunderstood a little bit of what you were saying, but so are you saying that he is seeing this more three-dimensionally than we are as like normal readers,
or at least started
I think
by doing the close reading?
No, we are trained, I feel, to read it in a certain fashion. Perhaps it is incorrect of me to describe it as a very flat viewpoint.
No, I kind of get your analogy, but I don't know. Well, I just like, I feel like this is more of he's kind of stuck within the text and not seeing the larger picture, whereas, like, I feel like that's what a really close reading does. It sticks you right into the trees. You can only see the trees. You can't see the forest. Whereas the way that I usually read books, I don't necessarily remember all the little tiny details of the book, but I remember the way that the forest looked, the way that the book overall looked.
And maybe you're doing it in a sense in more of what Barthes wants you to, or is arguing for. I don't think he's doing a close reading. I think what he's doing is this came up on me the second time I went through and I was writing my notes, that analysis. I don't think he's that far away from a close reading. I feel that his work is born. He has a chapter about how it's not a close reading. So thus, it has crossed his mind at a point that this can be confused with close reading. This is sort of a shift to the left in a way of analysis. It's not a departure too far from it. But I feel that, he's kind of awakened my eyes to the idea that close reading might not be perfect. And maybe that, that is how my way of analyzing work, the foundations of the Motz scale that we use, is all based upon, in a sense, close analysis of work in a very linear structure. And I'm kind of now, he has made me question the ways I went through it. But before
perhaps
we delve
we're doing too close. You mean in terms of Motz, perhaps we're doing too close of a look at each individual,
or it's too close to our familiarity
to see the entire thing
and to our perspective, to be honest, of how to analyze.
Before you go into where you're going to go next, I wanted to mention, because the way that you were talking about that made me kind of think about the way that he wrote this book, and it seems to me that he wrote two different books, because one of these books in here is definitely a close reading. But he goes line for line and explains what happens in each line. The other book is all of his explanations of what is going on within, and I feel like that's an entirely different, and that's what we're talking about right now. I feel like that's an entirely different work.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
And here's the thing is, upon rereading it again, I can now see, I think he wrote this in the style of how he wants it to be analyzed, or he's saying that this is how I think analysts analysis should go. I'm writing this book to be analyzed that way. And we went through straight close reading with it. So I'm just saying that it kind of, I think we're going to say this further discussion for the end, because we'll go into where it failed and where it didn't. But I just want to say that this is actually rereading this a second time at this point was when it hit me.
Yeah.
No, I see that, and I'll just add just real quickly about that. That yeah, you're right. Like it's sort of both at once, and so he introduces this as a sort of shift in worldview as a way to analyze text, which also is sort of set beside the traditional in quotes close reading, even though he claims that isn't what he's doing, which we'll say for later. But regardless, it is. I think it's fruitful of him to introduce that concept and to have you think about it on a different scale, if you will, than you might have been trained or been so ingrained to do. So that's all.
Okay, so we're on to 69, which is Equivocation to the Metonymic Falsehood, which is quite a weighty title there.
Yes.
Equivocation, because I had to look these up, is the use of ambiguous language in order to conceal.
Yes.
And metonymy is to attribute and describe, attribute a description as a name. For example, the term suit, as in describing a executive.
It's a good example.
So what he does here is, and that's actually I think the Wikipedia example on it.
Perfect.
Obviously.
He's basically lying for a purpose, which he covered quite a bit in our last episode.
Yeah, it goes back to the enigma thing he was pointing out, that the use of language within the story needs to be sort of equivocated so that it doesn't just stop outright, and the little nuances can continue along.
So on to
my least favorite titled section.
Well, being 70, being castrated and castration.
Sounds like a medical text.
Yes, or
from like the 1500s.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's why it's funny. Go on.
So I have here in my notes. It's the thematics as related to the delayed reveal.
Yes, pretty much. That's basically it.
Yeah.
Again, his fancy pants way of saying that, essentially. But again, still important to keep in mind. He's still pointing out valid things.
This success hinges on a structural artifice, identifying the symbolic and the hermeneutic, making the search for truth hermeneutic structure into the search for castration symbolic structure, making the truth be anecdotally and no longer symbolically the absent phalos. The coincidence of the two paths is affected structurally by keeping one or the other from ever being determined upon. Indeterminacy is a proof of writing. Aphasia concerning the word castrato has a double value, whose duplicity is insoluble. On the symbolic level, there is a taboo. On the operative level, the disclosure is delayed. The truth is suspended both by censorship and by machination.
Yeah, and I like that. It's again interesting to point out, to keep in mind that it's sort of doing not a double entendre, but it's serving two functions within the story.
So it's not
on two different levels.
It's not outright lying, but it's it's magic tricks for
yes. Smoke and mirrors of narrative.
Yeah.
Actually, oddly enough, this book is sort of a guide to how to perform magic tricks for writers.
Yeah.
In a way.
You can certainly take it as such.
It's how to completely.
It's how to use the tricks. Sure.
Alienate most human beings.
How to lose friends
with your writing.
People.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh no! Aside from castration, I don't think it's. I think there's some really good points throughout this.
Yeah, but nobody can read it.
Yeah,
you have to be like, you have to go to school for fucking 15 years to read this thing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. But we'll talk about that.
Or you
later.
can just listen to our podcast.
How to alienate most people.
We'll do it. We're reading it for you and tell you what it actually means.
71 is the transposed kiss, which is arguing the value of rereading a work for the new meanings involved. Yeah. So I kind of like this because this is actually one of the parts that I really disagree with Barthes for, because I don't have the time to reread works constantly in order to...
If only you for
well, just because you don't have the time doesn't mean you should. It doesn't mean you shouldn't.
Yeah, but the point is, if true analysis won't come based upon
a single reading,
not necessarily a single reading, but if you can't get your point across on a single reading, you're going to lose out on a large majority of your audience there.
Sure, that's a good point.
If it's too well hidden. There's some points that I would like. Yes, Steve. He's pointing at the SZ. But there's things like The Sixth Sense or Memento or The Usual Suspects, which are well worth that kind of thing. I wonder what this would have been like for a work that wasn't Saracen. Because Saracen also has the twist ending involved with it. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, he's like, you could look at all the ways that's possible, hinted at throughout this work at the ending. Just as you can go back and watch Memento and Usual Suspects and be like, but that's fun how they twisted that. And I don't think that is necessarily true to every single work.
Right.
I agree with that.
To a degree, though, he kind of says that any good work has this hidden thing at the end. It's not necessarily a quote-unquote twist ending. There's something that's revealed towards the end of the book in pretty much any good work, and I think that's what... I think Bart says that earlier on.
I would agree with
sections.
That. But I don't know if everything is requiring multiple for this specific point.
Right. You're saying it might not be to that degree, which I agree with as well.
Also, The Sixth Sense was terrible the second time.
All right. Well, we'll do a separate review about that.
The other two movies were good.
We have to do that for Masterpiece. So, how's that on the AFI 100 anyway?
I don't know. We'll get into that.
We're on to 72,
when it comes up.
Which is the aesthetic proof. Okay, so it's basically saying that these codes develop characters, and that it's like transferred over to the perspective the characters go forward with, and because of that, and just like normal people, they are blinded by their presumptions.
Yes, that's what I was getting to say. Yep.
He says here, the realistic artist never places reality at the origin of his discourse.
Yeah,
but only and always as far back as can be traced and already written real.
Yes, that's exactly the quote I was going to point out from that one.
Which I think is a good summary of this section.
All right, so we're on to 73, the signified as conclusion. So I said I wanted to read this one, so I'm going to, unless one of you wants to do it.
No, go ahead.
So this is referencing, again, Saracen, specifically in a scene where, prior to finding out that Lasagna is a castrato, Saracen is with her at a party and she sees a snake. And is frightened by a snake, and Saracen decides to be manly and kill the snake. So the snake episode is both an exemplum, inductive weapon of the old rhetoric, and a signifier referring to a character sem attached in this case to the castrato. In the classical system, semantic proof is indistinguishable from a logical process. One must simultaneously work up from signifier to signified and work down from the example to the generality that can be induced from it. Between the signifier to be frightened of a snake and the signified to be impressionable as a woman, there is the same distance as between an endoxal premise, timid people are afraid of snakes, and its abridged conclusion, or Zazamila is timid. Semic space is glued to hermeneutic space. The point is always to locate in the perspective of the classic text a profound or final truth. The profound is what is discovered at the end.
And that itself is profound, kind of.
No, I mean,
or meant to be.
I get it again, yes.
Basically, the levels that are not metaphor, but a scene and all the readings that can be taken out of a scene and move forward this character development that the author wants to use.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so now we're on a continuation of this one to 74, which is The Mastery of Meaning.
Also a good title.
Which is basically a build upon of that last thing, which is basically the tendrils of these scenes over the course of a common narrative in order to build the plot, build the thematics over the course of an entire work.
Yeah. And the one line from this that I like is, he writes, however, the signifying imagination is even more profitable if it fills a double function. It then endeavors to produce doubly articulated signs, which, if you include those things in your narrative and the reader can get them out of them, then yes, it will be more effective, essentially, is what he's saying.
And in a way, it's like a bird building a nest.
Yes.
That
that's a good one, too.
Yeah,
kind
the
of
structures, if it's braided well together, it can hold the structure of a narrative even more so, especially if one scene is doing 2 or 3
serving functions. Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
So now we're on to 75, which is the Declaration of Love, which is, I think, more of an example of what he was just saying with the use of love in narrative.
Kind of. Well, the first sentence of this section is amazing, and I'll read it out. The Declaration of Love, a banal, already written sequence, if ever there was one. Like, it's the most basic thing you could possibly have in a story.
Well, he's also saying that there's basically two outcomes: love or rejection.
Yes.
So, so if you want to read this section, if you want to know about how to use love, or in a sense, not the pitfalls, but the limits of love in a story as a device.
Yeah, that's well said.
So now on to 76, which is character and discourse, which is, in a sense, discussing character agency throughout a story.
Yeah. I like this one quite a bit, so delve into it for a bit.
This is one of the better ones for sure.
And then, Steve-O, would you do me a favor and read the section?
You want to read the whole section?
Yeah, it's pretty short.
Yeah, sure. All right, so Saracen interrupts Lasagna and thereby arrests the appearance of the truth. If we have a realistic view of character, if we believe that Saracen has a life off of the page, we will look for motives for this interruption. Enthusiasm, unconscious denial of the truth, etc. If we have a realistic view of the discourse, if we consider the story being told as a mechanism which must function until the end, we will say that since the law of narrative decrees that it continue, it was necessary that the word castrato not be spoken. Now, these two views, although derived from different likelihoods and in principle independent, even opposed, support each other. A common sentence is produced which unexpectedly contains elements of various languages. Saracen is impassioned because the discourse must not end. The discourse can continue because Saracen, impassioned, talks without listening. Both circuits are necessarily undecidable. Good narrative writing is of this very undecidability. From a critical point of view, therefore, it is as wrong to suppress the character as it is to take him off the page in order to turn him into a psychological character, endowed with possible motives. The character and the discourse are each other's accomplices. The discourse creates in the character its own accomplice, a form of theurgical detachment by which mythically God has given himself a subject, man, a helpmate, etc., whose relative independence, once they have been created, allows for playing. Such is discourse. If it creates characters, it is not to make them play among themselves before us, but to play with them, to obtain from them a complicity which assures the uninterrupted exchange of the codes. The characters are types of discourse, and, conversely, the discourse is a character like the others. And, by the way, in my book, it says, whoa, after that last line.
Yeah.
So whoever had this one before me was really blown away by that one.
I think this really deals with, in a sense, that the narrative provides a playground for and if you want to write realistic characters,
yes, exactly,
you have to, in a sense, it's what their agency would be in that world you have created.
Yes,
for them.
And that's basically the point I was going to bring up, and that's well said. But it's, again, I liked it quite a bit because that's something I like to think about when I'm doing my own writing, that it can be very effective if, as he says, they sort of are their own accomplices. They sort of work together, and ties back into the couple sections just before we were speaking about, where, again, taken together and when interwoven well, it will be just that much more effective as a narrative.
Yeah.
And also serves your own purpose as the author to further your narrative, but also not, if you will, blow your load and reveal the twist before you want it to be.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea of it's not
more narrative tricks, really.
When you're reading a good story or when you're experiencing a good story, you don't feel like people are playing in front of you. You feel like you're
with them. Sure.
You're part of that.
Yep.
So, number 77 is the Rereading 2, determined versus determinant, which is in a way a continuation of the previous section, and again dealing with character agency. It's in a sense, I feel the melding of what needs to be done with how they react in a way to it.
How they all sort of tie together.
And as it says, we have discussed the law of solidarity which governs the Rereading. Everything holds together, everything must hold together as well as possible. And that's the idea, is that like, if you can, when you can start nitpicking a work, when you can start poking holes, the author in a way has to keep in mind the natural progression, not only of nature, as we discussed earlier, with time and space, but what feels right for a character to do. You can't just all of a sudden add an extra motivation.
Something that would be like out, if you will, was out of character as the character was set up previously.
And also, I think what's interesting in this, they bring up the idea of the addition of other players in a text, and how like it brings up. I think I'm just going to read a quote here. This is the narrative fabric, seemingly subject to the discontinuity of messages, each of which, when it comes into play, is received as a useless supplement, whose very gratuitousness serves to authenticate the fiction by what we have called the reality effect, but it is in fact saturated with pseudo-logical links, relays, doubly oriented terms. In short, is a calculation which affects the plenitude of the literature. Here, dissemination is not the random scattering of meanings towards the infinity of the language, but a simple temporary suspension of affinitive, already magnetized elements before they are summoned together to take their place economically in the same package. And I think that's the idea, is that everything has to work well together.
It has to be set up well enough, and then come together at the right time and in the right way.
But and here the characters have to feel real and natural.
Yep.
Right.
So thanks, Bart.
Yeah.
Damn well better.
And to actually go into how I will die.
Yes.
The 78.
I knew you were going to make a joke of that one.
To die of ignorance.
Go on.
Which I feel like I did in that last section. Lack of codal knowledge is deadly. It is to Mark Twain, it's not what you know, what you don't know, it's what you know that isn't quite so.
Yeah.
I think is his old quote. In a way that characters who aren't familiar, in a sense, with the rules of narrative often die from it.
Yeah.
Or at least come to tragic fates because of it.
Yeah.
And you can, in a way, I think you can argue that Shakespeare's kind of tragic hero, because they usually have that one
falls in line with that
codal flaw
exactly
to them that makes them the tragic hero, that you being intuitively or actually understanding of what that code should be, you can feel like, oh, you should have done, why didn't the character do this?
Or having seen enough things like it, you can start to say, oh, that guy's going to die because of this.
You can start seeing the narrative threads
or,
as they come together.
If this holds to most, the way that most things like it go, that's going to cause you to die because you know enough. You're not completely ignorant, but what you don't know is going to kill you.
But you also don't know just enough to kill you. Yeah, exactly.
But they're also, again, to go back to that thing, fated to not know.
Yeah, exactly.
So, if my fate is to die of ignorance, Scott, your fate is before castration.
All right. Yes, if you say so.
Which is discussing, this is basically him taking on the ending of Saracen itself. With the explaining through the climax of Saracen how the codes for the reveal should go. I don't think there was anything too profound in this section. It was more of him exploring.
Here's the reveal, essentially. Or here it comes, it's coming, and this is where it is in the narrative.
Yeah. Just wanted another section about castration.
He basically wanted to have another title with castration in it, obviously.
Now, you corrected my vocabulary on this earlier. What is it? The denouement?
The denouement and disclosure.
Disclosure. Which is, actually, this is pretty neat. It's epic versus dramatic, which also is the journey versus the destination.
Yeah.
An epic work is about, following a character upon their journey, and the dramatic work is about having the delayed ending and the reveal at the end.
Yeah. No, I like it because it sort of mirrors, as we mentioned various other previous parts, Barthes is fond of putting contrast together. SC itself is a contrast, so he sort of goes a little bit in contrasting the epic, as you said, and what you follow and how within those two types of setups.
And I think that he's making a lot of commenting on how Saracen itself is a dramatic work and how that fits the codes for
and how,
that idea of, once again, the reveal.
How it falls in line of that, sure.
Right. Okay, so this one was... This is the beginning of the culmination of his work. So this is actually a longer section, but I want to read it. It's called The Voice of the Person. I think this is very important. This is one of two areas that I really want to discuss. The end approaches, the end of our transcription as well. We must therefore re-examine one by one each of the voices, each of the codes, whose grind has formed the text.
Grid.
Whose grid has formed the text. Here is one of the very last sems. What is it then that we have learned from the inventory of these sems? The sem, or the signified of connotation, strictly speaking, is a connotator of persons, places, objects of which the signified is a character. Character is an adjective, an attribute, a predicate. For example, unnatural, shadowy, star, composite, excessive, impious, etc. Even though the connotation may be clear, the nomination of its signified is uncertain, approximate, unstable. To fasten a name to the signified depends in a large part on the critical pertinence to which we adhere. The sem is only a departure, an avenue of meaning. These avenues can be arranged to form various landscapes. These are thematics. We have done no such arranging here. We have only given a list of these characters without putting them in any particular order. If we set aside the sems of objects or atmospheres, actually rather rare here at least, what is constant is that the same is linked to an ideology of the person. To inventory the sems in a classical text is therefore merely to observe this ideology. The person is no more than a collection of sems. Inversely, however, sems can migrate from one figure in the text to another. If we descend to a certain symbolic depth, where there is no longer any respect of persons, Saracen and the narrator have sems in common. Thus, form a classical viewpoint more psychological than symbolic. Saracen is the sum, the point of convergence of turbulence, artistic gift, independence, excess, femininity, ugliness, composite nature, impiety, love of whittling, will, etc. Hey,
it's all of those.
Love of whittling.
What gives the illusion that the sum is supplemented by a precious remainder, something like individuality in that qualitative and ineffable, it may escape the vulgar bookkeeping of compositional characters, is the proper name. The difference completed by what is proper to it. The proper name enables the person to exist outside the sems, whose sum nonetheless constitutes entirely. As soon as a name exists, even a pronoun, to flow toward and fasten onto, the sems become predicates, inductors of truth, and the name becomes a subject. We can say that what is proper to narrative is not action, but the character as proper name. The semic raw material, corresponding to a certain moment of our history of the narrative, completes what is proper to being, fills the name the inventory and structuration of sems, the reception of this voice of a person, can be of great service to psychological criticism, of minor service to thematic criticism, of minor service to psychoanalytical criticism. Everything depends on the level where we halt the nomination of the sem.
And I agree that was a quite interesting section, and I it's one of the ones I gravitated towards more closely than a lot of the others.
Well, I think this is,
but it speaks to us.
Yeah, and also I also think it is really one of two sections where he really kind of gives his summation.
Yes,
where he gives he's discussed all these parts, the idea of proper names before, the idea of what is a character agency, how far should we delve in our analysis of a character and their actions.
Yeah. I think this section, in talking about the importance of the proper name for so long, and like the idea that, well, where he said the proper name enables the person to exist outside the sems, I thought was kind of one of the more interesting points of this section.
And in a way, it transcends there's just bland thematics.
Right.
Because without it, anyone could play. Once that role is defined, it allows those the themes to really to
sort of breathe, if you will,
and coalesce into something.
It gets
more
to go
important.
beyond just the academia of
exactly.
You know, what the codes are, what the sems are, like what the
All right, so 82 is the. I apologize for butchering this because I know I am glissando.
Good enough.
That's pretty much exactly it. It's glissando. It's a music term, I believe.
Which, in a way, is talking about both the last section we did and also the one prior, not the one.
A couple ones back.
A couple ones back, which is the idea of the symmetry of codes and how codes... he was talking about how scenes thematically can exist and how the most powerful scenes are the ones that can work on multiple levels. This is, in a way, the codes that work together in symmetry in order to have a character be, in a way, I'm going to say, multidimensional.
Yes, I think that's the perfect term here.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's kind of a lot of about the way that one section of a story leads into the next. He talks about it right here where he says, by a whole chain of... we articulate disgust for the castrato and destruction for the statue by a whole chain of tiny causalities strung close together like beads sliding on an apparently smooth thread. 1.
Yes.
Saracen is disgusted at the sight of the castrato. 2. Disgust makes him avert his eyes from the sight. 3. Averting his eyes makes him turn his head. 4. As he turns his head, his eyes fall upon the statue, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what I got out of this section as being the more important part, is like just the idea of like the way that
how it flows, essentially.
The way that the flow of
the
story goes. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So Panda Mia is the next section, which we're going to skip over because both Saracen, his analysis of Saracen and the musings are both reaching the end here. And this is heavily focused on Saracen. And we haven't been paying far too much attention. This is a lot on... this is dealing with the themes of castration, which are heavily dealt with throughout this work, but...
At length.
Heavily.
And I understand it. I understand that that's one of the threads that he has built his narrative on. But I don't think it's...
It's not all that interesting as compared to the things that have come before that we just discussed. Sure.
Right. So...
In fact, if I may, he's focusing on one narrow thread and not looking at the big picture sometimes. So,
now, the next section is kind of a weird one. It's literature replete, which I actually looked up to see if it was a term in linguistics or in narrative. It's not. Or replete literature is totally a development of Barth.
Yes, he made it up for sure.
Regardless. This is also kind of a weird segment because it discusses heavily Saracen. However, he discusses literature replete in other future segments. So I'm going to read the last line here. This replete literature, readerly literature, can no longer be written. Symbolic plenitude, culminating in romantic art, is the last avatar of our culture.
I guess it is.
The last airbender.
So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of introduce literature replete because it'll... But even though I'm not quite sure, I guess it's the readerly text in a way. Actually, to be fair...
It's sort of a callback.
It's not only the callback to the thing, but it is about, in a way, the cliches of narrative.
Yeah, all right.
So it's saying, like, the love story is an archetype.
Yes.
The
as he mentioned earlier.
Revenge story is an archetype. Even though he argued against that kind of broad archetype. I think it's like basically it's the archetype plus all the other types of codes that create a unique
replete
narrative.
with all those codes, if you will.
But he's going to bring it up later, so I just wanted to introduce that. So next we're on to the interrupted replication, which again is dealing with the end of castration in Lasagna. So
sort of. I mean, it ties back into like the opening setup, if you will, like from the actual story of Saracen, when they're in the parlor, like looking at the painting or the sculpture.
Although I want to do an entire series, Bart out of context.
All right.
Real women, so many fetishes.
Yeah, that'll be a different series of ours.
Yeah.
So,
Castration jams all metonymy.
Yeah, exactly. I've always found that to be true.
the banal definition of being castrated.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you get where this is going. So, we're on to the voice. Oh, wait, did I miss one?
No,
Empiric
the empiric voice.
The empiric voice. Okay, so I wanted to... My notes say I should read this one wistfully.
Okay, do so.
Soon all the prioritic sequences will be closed. The narrative will die. What do we know about them? That they are born of a certain power of the reading, which tries to give a sufficiently transcendent name to a series of actions, themselves deriving from a patrimonial hoard of human experiences. That the typology of the proeritisms seems uncertain, or that at least they can be assigned no logic other than that of the probable, of empirics, of the already done, or already written, for the number and the order of their terms vary, some deriving from a practical reservoir of trivial everyday acts, to knock at a door, to arrange a rendezvous, and others from a written corpus of novelistic models, the abduction, the declaration of love, the murder. That such sequences are generally open to catalysis, to branching, can form trees, that when subjected to a logico-temporal order, they constitute the strongest armature of the readerly, that by their typically sequential nature, simultaneously syntagmatic and organized, they can form the favored raw material for a certain structural analysis of narrative.
Yep, that was very wistful indeed. And I like the last sentence. It's like, I take it, again, in a Barthian way, a certain structural analysis of narrative, such as this one, could be in parentheses there.
So now we're on to the voice of science. Of science!
For science.
You monster.
You monsters. Go ahead.
So, I have expectations that are of what an author expects an audience to know, or what they should know at that kind of the time of writing. In a way, he's describing that, like, there's certain educational thing that
certain level of such
yes.
that you might need to be
that
within.
That there's sort of as an author, you have to assess that what a majority. I think this is the subtext of what he's saying. But what a majority of your audience would know. Yeah. So if you want to talk about something completely arbitrary, like Flatland, A Romance of Minnie, you're not expecting everyone to know what that work is.
You can't assume they might know it outright. Yeah. Sure.
Right.
Or Wittgenstein. They might not know. But
well, he says here, the didactic material mobilized in the text generally corresponds to the set of 7 or 8 handbooks accessible to the diligent student in the classical bourgeois educational system.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like, he's basically, here's what you can expect people to know. Anything out of these 7 texts.
Most people have a general familiarity with X, Y, Z,
right.
etc. These ones, yes.
You know, in terms of when Balzac was writing this, it was like, he could expect any learned people that were reading this to know anything out of those 7 texts or whatever.
And I like when he says that critique of references has never been tenable except through trickery. And the idea is that, I might not know all of the references that Balzac was using when he wrote Saracen, but nor was he expecting me to know. Yeah, however many years later,
he can't know that. Yeah. No, let me just read one sentence that the one that points that out. What is outmoded, of course, is not a defect in performance, a personal inability on a part of the author to afford opportunities in his work for what will be modern, but rather a fatal condition of, going back to replete literature, mortally stalked by the army of stereotypes it contains. Which, again, as pretentious as that may sound, I kind of like it. Like, if you understand what that means, then it's kind of funny, and it's true as well.
So we're on to From Sculpture to Painting, which is 88. And this is the ending code of reference for Saracen, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least the story of Saracen and Lasagna. I don't really want to go into it because it's not dealing with kind of the theory behind it.
It's basically specifically about
it's
the
more
story.
about the end of the narrative of that part of the story.
Talking about what,
and
what
not as broad.
Saracen was expecting, and
Yeah.
All right, Scott, now will you do us a favor and read this next one? Because this is the one that is incredibly important, which is the voice of truth. Be our voice of truth here.
All right, the voice of truth. All the enigmas are now disclosed. The vast hermeneutic sentence is closed. All that will continue a little longer is what we might call the metonic vibration of castration, whose last waves will disturb the young woman and the narrator. We now know the morphemes, or the... Sorry if I mispronounced this. I believe this is a made-up term by him. We now know the morphemes, or the hermeneutinemes, of this hermeneutic sentence. This period of truth, in the rhetorical sense. They are, 1. Thematization, or an emphasizing of the subject which will be the object of the enigma. 2. Proposal, a metalinguistic index which, by signaling in 1,000 different ways that an enigma exists, designates the hermeneutic or enigmatic genus. 3. Formulation of the enigma. 4. Promise of an answer or request for an answer. 5. Snare, a pretense which must be defined, if possible, by its circuit of destination, by one character for another, for himself, by the discourse of the reader. 6. Equivocation, or double understanding, the mixture in a single statement of a snare and a truth. 7. Jamming, acknowledgement of the insolubility of the enigma. 8. Suspended answer, after having been begun. 9. Partial answer, which consists in stating only one of the features whose total will form the complete identification of the truth. And 10. Disclosure, decipherment, which is, in the pure enigma, whose motto is always the Sphinx's question to Oedipus, of course, a final nomination, the discovery and uttering of the irreversible word.
So that is his theory of enigmas?
Yeah. Which, I broadly like it. It makes sense, and he's sort of built the blocks to arrive at all those, again, to use our own metaphor, various threads coming together.
This is the second of the two segments where I really feel that he summarizes his work.
Yes.
And that is, even purer to the last one we read, a summation.
Yes.
This is a list of all the points I've made about an enigma thus far. And I have to agree, not all of them always apply, but for the part, that is the roles of how to create a mystery novel.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So now we are on to the Balzacian text.
I like to pretend that this is pronounced Balzacian.
All right.
Balkanization text.
Sure.
Which is just info on Balzac. I think that he's using that to express, like, in a sense, the cultural codes that surround
anything
it.
you might have missed, or a brief history to
I like the
a brief history of Balzac.
The first sentence. A long time? Hardly. Oh, I guess it's the first two sentences.
But for the main part, he's also tying together how other of Balzac's works could include Saracen in them,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of going meta, narrative on his own narrative.
Super Stephen King.
Yeah. So now we're on to 91, which is modification, where it discusses both the ending of the work Saracen, but also, in a sense, the power of narrative.
Yes.
And it goes back to the narrative as a contract and the failings of that, where, in a sense, the castration angle turns out was a turnoff for the girl.
Yeah.
And, ultimately, the narrative has no object. The narrative concerns only itself. The narrative tells itself. So,
yep.
In a way, it's saying no matter what you narrative. He's arguing that narrative has such a power to it that you can intend to manipulate it, but in a way, it has a existence of its own.
But it will manipulate you.
Yeah, it could,
yes.
Because you can't predict how people will react to a narrative.
Yeah, at least you may not be able to.
And I think there's a lot of that in when you listen to a lot of authors speak about writing something. They say, I intended for this to happen this way, but the characters took it a different way, or like it just went a different way. There's this feeling of even the things that you try to control within a story
might somehow get away from
you. End up, to some extent writing themselves,
Now, to keep up with Barthes' kind of Sly Sexual Undertones is 3 points of entry.
Yes.
Which discusses, in a way, the 3 major themes that can be taken out of Saracen. And, in a way, the 3, not only the themes, but the ways of approach for reading the story.
I think that's
how
a
to
subtle
look into it.
but important point about this one, yeah.
Any other points?
No. Those are all the points of entry. I don't have any more points of entry.
I don't know. This part didn't really make a huge impression on me, I don't think.
No, but I understand where he's coming from, because it's the idea is that you can look through it through the contractual nature of the narrator trying to sleep with. You can look through it through castration. You can look through it through a bunch of different ways. But how, there are in a way, again, this is not stated here, and it's kind of building off it. An author must be aware of the different ways that interpretation, I don't even know if they can be aware. That might be something that unconsciously just appears.
To a certain extent.
I think there's so many, you can always read something that wasn't supposed to be there into something like this.
Like castration.
Well, yeah.
So, as this is our final segment, I'm going to read the pensive text. Like the Marquis, the classic text is pensive, replete with meaning, as we have seen. It still seems to be keeping in reserve some ultimate meaning, one it does not express, but whose place it keeps free and signifying, this 0 degree of meaning, which is not its annulment, but on the contrary, its recognition. This supplementary, unexpected meaning, which is the theatrical sign of the implicit, is pensiveness. The pensive, in faces and text, is the signifier of the inexpressible, not of the unexpressed. For if the classic text has nothing more to say than what it says, at least it attempts to let it be understood that it does not say everything. This illusion is coded by pensiveness, which is a sign of nothing but itself, as though having filled the text, but obsessively fearing that it is not incontestably filled. The discourse insisted on supplementing it with an etc. of plentitudes. Just as the pensiveness of a face signals that this head is heavy with unspoken language, so the classic text inscribes within its system of signs the signature of its plenitude. Like the face, the text becomes expressive. Let us say, it signifies its expressivity, endowed with an interiority. What? Interiority?
Yes.
Whose supposed depth compensates for the parsimony of this plural. At its discreet urging, we want to ask the classic text, what are you thinking about? But the text, wilier than all of those who try to escape by answering about nothing, does not reply, giving meaning its last closure, suspension.
And that is about right.
Hold on. That's me closing the book.
So we are done with SZ.
The book is now literally closed on Bart. And not just in somewhat seriousness, the final point was well stated because within the story itself, it leaves it sort of open-ended, hanging, and he points out that that sort of was the point, or it's effective for that. And now I am done talking about SZ.
Yeah, I'll say that going back and looking through this again was a good way to understand some of the points that were made in the book a little bit better. However, I feel like they could have been made a lot clearer from the get-go. I don't think that this book needed to be quite so full of itself.
Yeah, well, it was his endeavor back in the day to do so.
To be really a douchebag?
Right. No, see, I wouldn't say that, but I see what you mean. But
no, I mean,
he was setting out to do something, and did he always live up? Did he always achieve the heights he?
My point is, he could have done the exact same thing and written it in a much clearer manner.
But how much of that is Richard Miller?
It could
and
be.
How much
of
that is Roland Barthes?
It could be all Miller, but I doubt it.
I don't know, because that is a translation that audience you have heard is quite flowery, to put it kindly, and often pretentious, and often it's actually written by a person ranting, like
Yeah.
with
Right.
a kind of beautiful rant of like an impassioned rant wanting to. But he got it. It's almost like he recorded himself and then
he clearly
recorded
loves
word for
language
word.
and loves discussing it, thinking about it, and delving into it.
Yes.
But however, sometimes you might get overwhelmed and a bit lost in it all.
I will certainly give it that. But there are sentences, and yeah, it might be the translator.
No, probably not, because this is not the first time. Like, every time I see Bart referenced in another work, it kind of has that
Had that bent
smirk to it.
Yes.
Like, oh, like in a way only he could write or something like that.
Yeah,
Well,
sure. But I
Either
can
way.
see that.
there was. I think that there was a lot of good ideas in here. However, I really wish it would have been easier to get to.
Alright.
It's like you
I
know.
see what you're saying.
If I could come up, it's like trying to get to the walnut meat without a nutcracker. You know.
If I could come up with a Bardian sentence right now to exemplify that, I would. But I certainly see what you mean.
He really opened my eyes. I kind of gave my final rant earlier,
Yeah.
but I wanted to give you the point which it struck me that this guy really opened my eyes to the failures of how I've been analyzing so far. But he didn't offer me something to replace it, or he attempted to.
Right.
But I'm not
Didn't
going
quite
to
get there. You didn't buy into it.
The thing is, I love Dostoevsky. I love reading his works. I don't have time to read them multiple times to like break it apart and eat all the walnut meat inside. To go to your
Sure.
metaphor.
No, I get that.
So we just start using that one all the time.
All right, well, we'll start as a running
The
gag.
succulent walnut meat.
Yes.
The nut meat. Yep.
But the castration meat. But no, like, and serious to your point, like, yes, he sort of drew out a different angle that you may have been so trained otherwise to not really, like, think about. Like, I want to say a literary worldview, I guess I'll call it. That, and did it maybe replace the old one? No, but it is something to think about going forward when you're studying and analyzing literature.
Yeah.
Also, there is a fear I have that the closer you look at something, especially multiple times, you can start seeing patterns where none were intended.
Yes, you can.
And I feel
sure.
that, like, again, with the castration angle that Bart was going for, yeah, I get it. There was castration there. That's not how I read Saracen. And
Is that a
and
consequence of him reading it so many times or in so many ways? Yeah.
I
Sure.
think that could actually poison your mind to the inherent meaning. I can think of all the fans of Game of Thrones nowadays are trying to predict the endings and come up with wild, outlandish endings because they're so invested in a work that it just their imaginations take it over
Right.
for what should be a kind of logical substance.
Yeah.
And I feel that Bart, his mentality threatens to do that, as you can see by the language he uses. But I'm really glad I read it, and it's a rough read. I still give it about an 8 out of 10 on difficulty scale for reading.
Yes.
But
Minimum, yeah.
So, but thankfully, we've done the job of reading it for you.
yes, and yeah, listen to our podcast. We'll be doing more of these.
Yes.
Not on SC though. We're gonna
I
find.
know
some
we're
other-
reading Roland Barthes' entire
his entire catalog.
bibliography.
I celebrate his whole catalog.
Yeah, we have to start a new show, Big Bibliography of Bart, but that'll be coming soon.
Now I think we're next large work we're doing is camping.
Yeah.
Next large work we're doing.
Yes,
How long is that one? I thought that was just a short essay.
Camping. Harold Camping.
Campbell.
No, Campbell. Is it
Campbell. Yeah. No.
I believe.
Camping is the
I don't know.
crazy
We're
guy,
doing
right?
one of those.
Yeah. It's
Someone else could be
it's
named
Campbell.
Camping and not be crazy.
It's the next one we're doing is Man of
Hero with
Hero
a Thousand Faces.
Hero with a Thousand Faces. Yeah. That's an interesting read.
I'm looking forward to that one. So
That one's like twice as long as this book. So
Well, we're just going to read it 5 times and analyze it once, like Bart.
So we'll be ready to go sometime in 2019.
sure.
All right. Well, my name is Jonathan Manzer, here with Stephen Rossi
Have a good one.
and Scott Thurlow.
And you can S my Z. See you next time.
This has been the Neophytes of Narratology.
We hope that you've experienced an epiphany or two of the literary nature, but only metaphorically, of course. Music by Christopher Morgan, editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Mazer.